Hi, this is Casting Scenics. I'm Chris. This week, I'm going to be painting, flocking, and water effecting a game board that I've made. Stay tuned. Okay, here are the prime tiles. They're ready for paint. And you can notice the edges there where I put the Sculptamold to blend the resin veneer. That absorbed more of the paint than the resin did, so it's leaving a chalky finish there. So here I've got craft paint, which I wouldn't say dry brushing, certainly, but it's a light coating of brown craft paint over the entire surface. It blends pretty well into the primer, so that's helpful. They complement each other, fairly close to the same color. Regardless, I'm going to be going over this with a lighter dry brush and then a dark wash. So any of that primer that's still visible should blend in pretty well. Pretty quick paint job, nothing too fancy. Okay, now I'm adding some white craft paint, and I'm gonna blend that with some of the brown here. Come up with a lighter tan color to hit some of the high spots. I'm going with a progressive dry brush, a couple of coats lighter than this, but this whole process probably took me 30 minutes. Here I'm just wiping off some of that excess paint. I'm trying to keep my brush strokes fairly random while going over the entire surface. The last thing I want is to be able to see the obvious brush strokes. You can see some of those there on the tile I'm working on right now, but I end up blending those in pretty well, or at least well enough for what I'm doing. This is one of the lighter coats. It looks like the lightest coat before I switch over to gray to pull out some of the details on the rock. Again, this isn't anything fancy. It's just a progressively lighter brown dry coat, dry brush that is. And I'm pulling out some of the detail on the rock here. I'm gonna end up dry brushing this too, but again, nothing crazy. I think I only go with one other highlighted gray color. Paint jobs really don't get much easier than this. They look pretty good considering it's terrain. This is that lighter gray coat. And now I am airbrushing a dark brown wash over the entire board. I went with a brown, kind of a almost black, muddy brown. I figured that would work well with the rock and the dirt that I'm going for here. Now this is a wash that I made. Were I using a GW wash, I'd probably have $30 of wash in this board. That's something of an exaggeration, but still, it wouldn't be cheap. Okay, now here I am going over the majority of the surface with tacky glue. I'm using a 3-inch disposable chip brush here. This is going to help me put my static grass down. I'm not going over the entire surface, or at least I'm not going over the entire surface heavily. I'm going to pretty much go over the entire surface with this tacky glue. Some of it's going to dry before I get the static grass down, and that's really not going to hurt my feelings a bit. It's going to make it easier to get variety in the grass. Here's my big Hawken static grass applicator full of 2mm static grass. I got from, I think they're called World War Scenics. It's a nice product. This is a mix of, I think they're spring and scorched earth static grass. And again, I'm just going with a 2mm here. You can use 4 or 6 or whatever, but this is what I've got an abundance of, and it's gonna hold up really well over time and still look good. I never knew what I was missing until I made this static grass applicator. It really helps out a lot. Okay, here I'm putting down more tacky glue strategically. I'm gonna put some shrubbery in various places. And this shrubbery that I've got is just a blended up sponge that I painted, or a sponge that I painted and then blended up. I'm just putting that down in various places. I'm trying to get a little variety in color here. I don't think this board looks bad, but a little color certainly doesn't hurt anything. Reds and yellows and greens. You can certainly go with something a little more subdued, but again, I like color. Okay, now to protect this, I've got this polyacrylic by Minwax. This stuff's water-based. It's made for hardwood floors and furniture, so it's damn durable. I like it a lot better than Mod Podge. It also dries relatively quickly. I've got it in a little atomizer spray bottle that I've mixed it 1 part water, 1 part polyacrylic. This is a satin finish, so it doesn't leave much of a shine. Or is this dead flat? Or flat, whatever. It's not shiny when it dries, that's the important thing. Okay, water effect time. I've got some acrylic inks here that I'm going to be mixing into this 2-part tabletop epoxy. This stuff is somewhat forgiving if your mix ratio is a little off, but you really want it as close as you can possibly get it. It's gonna help it cure in a reasonable time and assure that your tabletop doesn't end up tacky. That'd be a bummer. Mixing up about 6 ounces here. I end up using all of that. I had a piece on standby in case I didn't, or in case I had mixed up too much, but like I said, I ended up using it all. And with this acrylic ink, this stuff's pretty potent. You don't want to overdo it. Your water will end up looking like mini golf water, and that's just not for me. A little oversaturation is not a bad thing, but it's easy to go too hard with the acrylic ink. And if you do, you can always mix up a little more epoxy. This ended up working out pretty well though. Honestly, I kind of wish I had put a little more pigment in it, but whatever. It doesn't look bad. Of the 4 tiles I made, this is the only one that had a water feature. I didn't want to go too nuts. I wanted to be able to lay scatter terrain over the majority of the board, but this won't pose much of an issue for models. Multiple ways to get around that water. Okay, here I'm taking a heat gun and getting rid of some of these air bubbles. I'm also helping this epoxy to warm up a little and dry faster than it would under normal circumstances. I went a little too hard at that, and you're gonna see the results of it right here in a little bit. But yeah, just blasting away some of those air bubbles. And helping to get that epoxy kick-started. Here I've got some painted sawdust that I'm using as something of a algae. And you can see a cat hair that I just managed to sprinkle in there. That's always fun digging out. I always manage to do it though, so it's something I know I need to keep an eye on. The sawdust won't be extremely noticeable after I put the texture over the water, but still it adds a little something that I don't mind. Don't mind being there. I don't mind taking the time to do it because it's not like it takes hours. I probably spent 3 minutes putting this stuff in. Well worth it. Okay, I've got some reindeer moss here that I'm putting in as, I guess, seaweed. Had I the foresight, I would have super glued it down to the bottom as opposed to what I'm going to end up doing, which is pushing this stuff down with a wooden skewer and essentially hoping that it doesn't float back up. Some of it did, but again, it's not too off-putting. It ended up working out, but hindsight being what it is, I would have super glued these down to the bottom before I poured the epoxy. Okay, here I'm going with a clear acrylic caulk, which is paintable for that surface detail. And in the small circular pond there, you can see what happens when you warm this epoxy up too much during the cure process. Here I'm just adding some wash to this acrylic caulking. Now this caulking goes on white but dries clear. I'm adding these washes just to tint it a little. and it's not quite to my liking, so I go with the blue acrylic ink. Add a little drop of that. That stuff really does go a long way, so be careful with it. I've just got a cheap throwaway acid brush here that I'm going to be applying this stuff with. Bristles do come loose in these, so that's something to be mindful of. Just keep an eye on it. It's pretty easy to pick those bristles out at this point. You just don't want it to dry with those bristles left in there. I'm just tapping over the entire surface with this acid brush. I'm going with a pretty thin layer here. And now I am breaking up that brush texture with an empty airbrush, just pushing the caulking around on the surface to give it a more natural look. It's an easy enough step, and it does make quite the difference. Okay, here I've got some 12 mil grass tufts that I've made. I'm gonna pick out a few places here and there to put those. This again is just tacky glue that I'm putting it down with, or putting them down with. Various spots on the board. I've got some medium green and yellow tufts. Again, 12 millimeter. They add quite a bit. Okay, as you can see, this shrubbery that I put down earlier is not fixed as well as I would like. I just don't think it's going to hold up over time. So again, the Minwax polyacrylic, I'm just sucking some of that up in a syringe, undiluted, and I'm impregnating that into the sponge. It's going to act as a protective coating and completely saturate the sponge to affix it to the table better. I like this acrylic coating quite a bit. Stuff's pretty great. Durable and cleans up with water. And that's it. This is the finished product, finished table. 30 by 44. There's Carl. He approves. And there you go. Thanks for watching. Okay. That ends this video and this video series. Next time I'm going to be doing something different. What exactly, I'm not sure yet, but it's going to be different. Like, subscribe, stay tuned. Thanks.